Chapter 21. Being a demon lord is harder than a 996 job. System notification. Spend 20,000 kill points to upgrade. Stealth LV2. You can now hide within rocks and move through them. Spend 10,000 kill points to upgrade. Seeing the effects of Stealth LV2, Xu Yuan couldn't help but feel excited. He had decided to upgrade this skill because it was incredibly useful. Now that he could move through rocks, it would make things even easier. After closing the system interface, Xu Yuan set off on his journey to find the remaining monsters in the main world. Meanwhile, in the forest near the grassland base, a group of players stood atop the trees, watching the newly built foot-scrubbing shelter on a small hill below. They whispered among themselves as they observed the scene. Monsters from all directions were gathering around the shelter, but once inside, they just stood there dumbly. As the monsters crowded in, they were quickly taken down one by one. Even creepers were among them, but even when the shelter's slope attacked them, none of the creepers showed any signs of exploding. The players couldn't believe what they were seeing. Holy crap! This is amazing! We can farm mobs without taking any damage. Man, Xiaopo's got some tricks. How did we not notice he was this smart before? If we had this thing yesterday, that fight would have been so much easier. This is awesome. Now we've got something to do at night. The footwork trick was blowing everyone's minds. After all, a method for farming mobs without getting hurt? That meant they wouldn't be short on supplies anymore, and they'd be able to grow stronger even at night. With this method, they could finally control the monsters for good. Every player was thrilled with this breakthrough. Even Steve wasn't an exception. However, he was puzzled. Although Steve hadn't spent much time with Xiaopo, he had a general understanding of him. Xiaopo came here with a few friends and was barely considered a squad leader. But he wasn't particularly capable, just an average player. That's why Steve hadn't given him any significant responsibilities in the previous battle. Steve couldn't figure out how Xiaopo had suddenly come up with such an ingenious strategy. It wasn't that Steve was underestimating him, he trusted his own judgment of people. If Xiaopo had this kind of ability, Steve would have promoted him long ago. His friends seemed to share his confusion. I didn't know Xiaopo had it in him. Feels like he's trying to win people over. Winning people over? Does he really have the skills to manage them though? Yeah, but how did he suddenly get so smart? No idea. We sent him to mine rocks today, and when he came back, he had this whole strategy ready. And he didn't even bring back that many rocks. Hearing their discussion, Steve quickly caught onto the key point. He went out. Where did he go? Steve's friends realized what was going on when they heard the tone in his voice. There was no way someone like Xiaopo could come up with such a tactic. So, the answer had to lie in whatever happened while he was out. He went to the spot where we were mining rocks earlier. Once Steve and his crew got this information, they quietly slipped out of the woods. They immediately started heading toward the rock mining site. About 10 minutes later, they arrived at the cave where Xiaopo had first discovered the footwork shelter. As soon as they got there, Steve noticed two trapdoors, one outside the cave and one inside. Seeing those trapdoors, Steve quickly pieced most of the situation together. The trapdoor outside must lead into the cave. The one inside must have had something built on top of it before, probably the same foot-scrubbing shelter that Xiaopo demonstrated. His friends nodded in agreement. This explanation made a lot more sense than the idea that Xiaopo had figured out the trick on his own. Still, there were some things they couldn't wrap their heads around. If they already tore down the shelter, why leave the passage behind? And if Xiaopo didn't come up with this, then someone else must have. So who was it? Steve had his own set of questions swirling in his mind. Something about this didn't add up. After thinking it over for a moment, he started talking through his thoughts. Let's say someone else built the shelter. When Xiaopo and his crew got here, they found it but didn't see anyone else around. That would mean the person had already left, right? And if even Xiaopo and his friends knew to dismantle the shelter before leaving, wouldn't the builder also know that? It just doesn't make sense. And here's another thing. Xiaopo must have used the passage to get into the shelter and figure out how it worked. So, the passage must have been left behind by whoever built the shelter in the first place. But why would the person who built it need the passage? They already knew how to make a footwork shelter. They could just kill the monsters and leave. This isn't some base or permanent location, so why go through the trouble of digging a passage? It's too illogical. Steve's friends agreed that something felt off. If they had known how to build a footwork shelter, they wouldn't bother with a passage either. Once the monsters were dead, they'd just destroy the shelter and leave. No need to dig anything extra. And this wasn't a base or a spot where monsters spawned regularly. There was absolutely no reason to leave a passage here. Even if they had to leave quickly, they'd at least replace the trapdoors with stone blocks. No matter how you looked at it, the current setup didn't make any sense. Steve thought long and hard, but he couldn't figure out the logic behind it. It was almost as if the whole thing had been deliberately staged. But why would someone do that? Why give away such an effective strategy? Was it intentional or just an accident? If it was intentional, they could have just posted the strategy on the forums. Wouldn't that have been faster? And if it was an accident, that's a pretty big mistake to make, right? Strange. This is just too strange. Steve felt like this whole thing had something to do with the white-eyed monster. It wasn't a baseless suspicion. The cave was so close to the player base, and with the players live streaming their progress, pretty much everyone knew what was going on. If another player had been here, they'd know that people would soon discover the shelter. So why would they leave it intact? That's why Steve thought the white-eyed monster might be behind it all. But he couldn't figure out why. If the monster had done this, there was no benefit for him. He controlled the mobs, after all. They were like his little minions. Why would he send his minions right into the players' hands? Plus, now that players could farm mobs, they would grow stronger faster, which would make things even worse for him. Steve just couldn't make sense of it. Forget it. Overthinking won't help. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. The more Steve thought about it, the more frustrated he got. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being played. Maybe he was just overthinking everything, developing a persecution complex. If he kept going like this, it might mess with his mind. Might as well take things one step at a time. Steve and his friends didn't stick around much longer and returned to the base. By the time they got back, Xiaopa had already formed a guild. It wasn't that hard to create a guild in the game. Once you applied, all you needed was 50 people to join within a day, and the guild would be officially established. Xiaopa had already gathered more than 50 players. Nobody had any objections to him becoming the guild leader, either. Even though most players had originally wanted Steve to take the position, Xiaopa had brought them more benefits lately, so he made sense as the leader. As soon as Xiaopa saw Steve and the others return, he rushed over to greet them. "Steve, I've been looking for you. Just now, I set up a guild for the players, and I wanted to officially invite you to be the vice president of our Triumph Guild." Xiaopa didn't have much in the way of skills, but he certainly knew how to work people. He understood very well that there was no way he could manage a guild on his own. But Steve had a lot of trust among the players. That's why Xiaopa had come up with this plan. He'd be the guild leader, and Steve would be the vice president. The players would have no problem with that. Chapter 22 Zombie 007. From now on, Steve would be handling everything. Xiaopa could just sit back and relax, playing the hands-off boss. Hearing Xiaopa's plan, Steve immediately understood what he was up to. At this moment, Steve was caught in a tight spot. The main issue was that Steve wanted to stay. If he didn't agree to Xiaopa's proposal, he likely wouldn't be able to remain here. After all, Xiaopa had already set up a guild. If Steve wasn't a member, there was no way he could continue living in this area. But if he agreed, it would mean accepting Xiaopa's orders. Their friends, seeing the situation, were ready to stand up for Steve. However, Steve stopped them. He turned to Xiaopa, smiled, and said, "Guild Master Pe, as you wish." There's a saying, you don't hit someone with a smiling face. Steve knew he couldn't outright oppose Xiaopa. More importantly, Steve wanted to stay. Although Steve had previously considered starting his own guild, it wasn't as easy as it seemed. Running a guild is no small task. And with all the white-eyed monsters lurking around this plane, ready to cause trouble at any moment, the player's progress would inevitably be affected. Steve wasn't stupid. If he were to start a guild, he definitely wouldn't want to do it with this group. Too many uncertainties surrounded them. All the hard work the players had put into building things could be wiped out in an instant. That's why Steve decided to accept the position. As vice president, he had the responsibility to help the players develop, but he wasn't the one making the big decisions. That would all be on Xiao. If something went wrong, Steve could wash his hands of it and walk away scot-free. Either way, it wouldn't affect him personally. At most, it would be a blow to his pride. But for Steve, this was the best possible outcome. If he started his own guild and it got destroyed by the monsters, the blow to his ego would be even worse. Xiaopa was a little surprised to see how quickly Steve agreed. After pulling Steve into the guild, they exchanged a few pleasantries before new players began arriving at the plane one by one. The players already there welcomed the newcomers with open arms. Welcome to Triumph Guild. Join the guild first, and you'll get a special guide as a surprise. Building materials are in the communal chest. If you're building a house, feel free to take some. The entire day, players kept arriving at the planes. By the end of the day, the player count on the plane had already exceeded 5,000. And that wasn't counting the players still on their way. Since the game's map was so large, after a player died, they could only respawn within a certain distance from where they died. Some players who were further away had to go through a cycle of dying, respawning, and walking over only to die again and repeat the process, which made their journey take longer. The plane had undergone a massive transformation since before. The size of the base had expanded to more than 10 times its original area. It now felt like a full-fledged starting village in a game, minus the NPCs. Although night was falling, the players on the plane were still full of energy, showing no signs of going indoors to hide from the night. Instead, everyone was excited, preparing to head out on a hunt. Let's go. I can't wait to try out that foot trap technique. Me too. Finally, no more hiding in matchbox-sized rooms at night. I'm so glad I came here. Just learning this new strategy alone was worth it. Remember, the guild leader said no streaming, alright? Of course. We've got to keep this strategy secret for now and grow quietly. It had to be said, the terrain of this plane was truly excellent. Since it was so open, monsters were everywhere at night. Players only needed to knock down the torches around the base, and they could set up foot traps nearby to farm monsters easily. Before nightfall, Xiaopa had led a group to set up many foot traps around the perimeter of the base. As soon as night fell, players started moving into these traps, ready to experience the thrill of hunting monsters without taking any damage. None of the players realized that, in the distance, a pair of glowing white eyes was silently watching their every move. After a day of searching, Xu Yuan finally found the witch and the slime. These two creatures were like rubber bands, impossible to find when you're looking for them, but everywhere when you're not. After securing the first kills on both, Xu Yuan gained several skills. Potion Toss LV1. Throw potions of poison, weakness, slowness, and instant damage. Cooldown, 30 seconds. Cost to upgrade, 10,000 kill points. Potion Mastery LV1. Use potions of healing, fire resistance, swiftness, and water breathing. Cooldown, 30 seconds. Cost to upgrade, 10,000 kill points. These skills were from the witch. Both were incredibly useful. It was like Xu Yuan now had a built-in supply system. Since his explosion skills drained his health, Potion Mastery was a lifesaver. He could blow stuff up and immediately heal himself. Potion Toss was just as handy. Poison, weakness, slowness, instant damage. These potions were all offensive tools. Against other players, he now had more ways to deal with them. Plus, the instant damage potion was exactly what Xu Yuan needed. After all, using that potion on monsters actually healed them. This was perfect for his taming system. To tame a monster, it had to kill 10 players without dying. For regular monsters, that was tough, since players had learned to fight back. In most cases, monsters would get hurt. But with this skill, Xu Yuan could simply heal the monster when it was low on health, boosting his taming success rate. Aside from the witch's skills, the slime's first kill skill was also incredibly useful. In fact, it complemented Xu Yuan's Demon King persona. Clone LV1. Sacrifice 50% of health to summon a clone. The clone can move and provide vision. Cost to upgrade, 20,000 kill points. What kind of demon king doesn't have a clone? Plus, Herobrine also had one. So, the slime's skill perfectly filled that gap. For now, the clone was just a mobile eye, but it could be upgraded. If the clone could eventually inherit some or even all of the main body's strength, Xu Yuan's capabilities would skyrocket. The new skills were a huge boost to Xu Yuan's power. After obtaining them, he wasted no time putting them to use. At this moment, Xu Yuan's clone was the one spying on the players from a distance. Meanwhile, his real body was in another part of the plane, gathering a group of monsters he called lucky survivors. These survivors were about to participate in a massive feast. Spider 101? You've survived this long without dying? Not bad, you're in. Zombie 007? With a number like that, I'd be crazy not to pick you. Blackie 88? Nice and lucky. Hope you last long enough not to be a bad omen. When it came to choosing monsters to tame, there were rules to follow. Xu Yuan hadn't understood the meaning behind the monster's numbers at first. After asking the system, he learned that the number represented when the monster was spawned. For example, Zombie 001 was the very first zombie to spawn in this world. Although monsters sometimes spawned simultaneously, the system tracked them down to the 1,000th decimal place. So while players might think two monsters appeared at the same time, there was always a slight difference. Once Xu Yuan learned this, he knew how to pick which monsters to tame. Obviously, the lower the number, the better. Even though these monsters had no awareness, surviving this long without dying was still a sign of good luck. And sometimes, luck is just another form of strength. Chapter 23 Boom. Xu Yuan chose the monsters with the earlier numbers for a reason. After all, with him around, their luck buff would continue to stack. After roaming the grasslands for a bit, Xu Yuan managed to collect a good group of candidates for his all-you-can-eat buffet. These included Zombie 007, Little Black 88, Spider 101, Little Zombie 520, and Little White 233. He hadn't expected to run into a little zombie, given how low their spawn rate was, but luckily, Xu Yuan had already unlocked control over the Spider, Little Black, and the Little Zombie, so when he found them, it was a simple matter of recruiting them. Right now, Xu Yuan planned to control only one of each type of monster. He wasn't sure which of them would have the highest potential, so it was better to test the waters by taming one from each species first. Of course, Xu Yuan had no intention of taming any creepers. Sure, their attack power was high, but they were one-time use only. Creeper, so I'm just not worthy, huh? After selecting his seed players, Xu Yuan also controlled a few more zombies, creepers, and little whites. These were his suicide squads, meant to cover the seed players while they enjoyed their buffet session. Once everything was ready, Xu Yuan used one of his clones to scout out the movements of the nearby players. At the moment, the players were grouped in teams of 4, fully immersed in the art of Thurk. Each player was slashing away at their targets like expert foot masseuses, completely engrossed in their task. They were giving it their all. After experimenting with it themselves, the players had fully let their guard down. The pedicure booth was indeed safe, so they saw no need for caution anymore. Just farm away. Seeing this, Xu Yuan knew it was time. Alright, let's feast. Before setting off, Xu Yuan spent 150,000 intimidation points to upgrade his monster control range to 45 by 45 meters. He had to admit, intimidation points were consumed pretty quickly. All the points he had painstakingly saved up during the day were now gone just to expand his control radius. With the range increased, Xu Yuan could now control more monsters, making it easier to protect his seed players. Once everything was prepared, Xu Yuan positioned his clone at a high vantage point, giving him a full view of the battlefield. His real body remained hidden underground beneath a rock. After upgrading his stealth skill, Xu Yuan had become capable of moving freely through solid stone, making things much more convenient. He no longer needed to reveal himself to control the monsters, and thanks to his clone, he had a clear view of the battlefield without having to worry about visibility. His clone would handle the scouting, and his real body would focus on controlling the monsters. While walking through the underground rocks, Xu Yuan slowly directed the monsters toward the players' footwork booths. Meanwhile, the players were still lost in the joy of their farming session, completely unaware of the danger closing in on them. This footwork booth is amazing. Look at all the loot dropping like rain. My luck's been off the charts. I just got an iron ingot. At this rate, I'll have a full iron set in a few days. With the footwork booth, we'll never run out of arrows again. Plus, all the bones. Everyone will have their own wolf cub, and will scare the life out of that white-eyed monster. The 4 players inside the booth were swinging their stone swords as they chatted, each covering a different side. One of them, a player named Li Tu, was responsible for one corner of the booth. Suddenly, a creeper approached from outside. Li Tu didn't think much of it at first and was about to swing his sword when, boom, the creeper exploded. Though the blast was blocked by the stone walls, preventing any damage to Li Tu, the unexpected explosion still scared him out of his wits. What the hell? What just happened? The other players in the booth also heard the loud explosion and were caught off guard. Before they could react, a swarm of zombies rushed in, blocking them inside. The zombies began their attack as soon as they entered. Li Tu and the others, though startled, quickly regained their composure and fought back, instinctively swinging their swords in defense. However, there were too many zombies. After barely managing to take down 2, the players were already on the verge of death. More monsters kept pouring in through the hole left by the creeper's explosion. Just when they thought they were done for, something strange happened. The zombies suddenly stopped attacking. Li Tu and the others were stunned. What's going on? Why aren't they moving? Did I lag out? Or did you guys lag out? Or did the zombies lag out? As the players stood there, dumbfounded, a little zombie suddenly rushed in from outside the booth. With a few quick hits, it finished them off before they could even react. Li Tu and his friends died in confusion, never understanding what had just happened. Why had the creeper exploded out of nowhere? Why had the zombies suddenly stopped attacking? Shortly after their deaths, similar strange incidents occurred in other pedicure booths across the grasslands. The sequence of events was nearly identical. A creeper would explode, followed by a swarm of zombies or little whites rushing in to attack the players, but they wouldn't kill them outright. Instead, they left the players with just a sliver of health. Once the players were defenseless, a monster would appear, whether it was a zombie, little white, little black, or a spider, and finish the job. The grasslands echoed with the sounds of explosions and players' screams. Meanwhile, the guild chat of the Victory Guild was in complete chaos. What the hell is going on? Wasn't the footwork booth supposed to be completely safe? Why did the creepers explode out of nowhere? That was so freaky. Why didn't those monsters finish us off right away, but left us with just a little health for a zombie to come and kill us? You guys died the same way too. Damn it, we got taken out by a little zombie that jumped up and hit us in the knees. Same here. We got killed by Little Black. The guild chat was flooded with frantic messages, and the grasslands resounded with the constant boom, boom of explosions. It sounded like a festival. Inside the guild's base, Steve read the messages, and everything clicked into place. I knew it. This whole footwork booth thing had something to do with that white-eyed monster. Now it all makes sense. Steve hadn't gone out hunting this time. He had found the footwork booth too suspicious, so he and his friends decided to stay behind at the base and keep an eye on things. Steve had a gut feeling something was off, and sure enough, he was right. His friends were shaken by the realization. So it really was him. He set up the footwork booth just to make us think we could farm safely, then ambushed us. I knew he wasn't that simple. That escape earlier, he was just pretending, wasn't he? But why didn't he show up this time? Why is he controlling those monsters to kill the players instead? And why go through all this trouble? He could have killed us easily last time. Why build a booth and set all this up just to kill us? Though they were certain the white-eyed monster was behind all this, they still couldn't understand why he went to such lengths. He could have wiped them out in one go, so why all the theatrics? Why pretend to run away and build a pedicure booth, only to kill them in the end? Wouldn't a straightforward attack have been easier? Steve thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up with understanding. His appetite is huge. He's doing all this just to attract more people here. It finally made sense. Steve hadn't understood it before, but now he realized the monster's plan. He had orchestrated everything, the fake escape, the pedicure booth guide, all of it, to lure more players to the area. Hearing Steve's words, his friends' minds suddenly cleared. Yeah, that explains everything. Damn, he's treating us like part of his little farming game. His mind is terrifying. He's been manipulating the player's psychology from the start. Chapter 24, Why isn't the footwork technique working? At this moment, Steve and his friends finally realized the true terror of the white-eyed monster. In fact, the monster itself wasn't what made it so terrifying. Its power wasn't overwhelming. The real fear stemmed from not having enough firepower. With the right gear, anyone could handle a powerful monster. What made this white-eyed monster so terrifying was its cunning. It could completely manipulate the psychology of most players, setting up one trap after another. Players would walk right into the traps willingly. By the time they realized what had happened, they probably wouldn't even know how they died. That was the scariest part. Steve and his group shuddered at the thought. The white-eyed monster hadn't harmed them directly, but its step-by-step plotting made it far more dangerous. What they were up against wasn't just any ordinary monster. Thinking about this, the group began to feel a bit hesitant. Maybe we should just leave? We can't beat him. Whether it's strength or strategy, we're not his match. There's no point in dragging this out. Yeah, eventually this group will get wiped out. This guild won't survive. Hearing his friends, Steve didn't object. Alright, you guys go. Find a place to regroup and grow stronger. I'll stay. The group looked at Steve, puzzled. They wanted to convince him to leave too, but Steve immediately explained. He's going through all this trouble just to kill more players. I'm not sure why he wants to kill so many, but it's definitely benefiting him somehow. His seemingly perfect plans actually reveal his weakness. He can't track players' locations directly. That's why he sets these elaborate traps to lure them in. Now that we know his weakness, it's much easier to deal with. In a few days, he'll definitely show up again. On that day, I'll livestream the entire process of him slaughtering players. And I'll explain everything to everyone. Once players become wary of him, no one will willingly walk into his traps anymore. If no one falls into his traps, his progress will slow down. As long as we avoid him and grow stronger quickly, we'll eventually beat him. Steve understood his friend's concerns, but he had no plans to leave. Now that they had figured out the white-eyed monster strategy, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. They'd already spent so much time here, so Steve didn't mind sticking around a few more days. Given the way the white-eyed monster was setting things up, he'd likely return soon to harvest more victims. Steve wasn't foolish enough to think he could take the monster on directly. What he could do was broadcast the battle live, letting more people see and understand that the players currently had no chance of defeating him. Steve didn't expect Xiaopa to do the live streaming. After all, Xiaopa had discovered the footwork technique, and there was no way he would share it with everyone so easily. So, this had to be Steve's job. Once this task was done, Steve wouldn't waste any more time trying to fight the white-eyed monster head-on. For now, the best course of action was to hinder the monster's growth while developing their own strength quickly. Only then could they stand a chance against him in the future. Steve's thinking was clear. This was the best plan for the current situation. Facing the white-eyed monster head-on was simply not an option. The only way to limit the monster's progress was to stop more players from falling into its hands. His friends listened to his reasoning and, though still concerned, decided to respect Steve's decision. Alright, we'll go to another place and develop from there. We've already mastered the footwork technique, so as long as no monsters disturb us, we should grow fast. We'll leave at dawn. Be careful, boss. You guys go first. I'll stay behind with the boss and keep an eye on things. Aside from Xiao Wu, who stayed behind with Steve, the rest of the group prepared to leave. Not long after their discussion, they noticed players rushing into the base like they were running for their lives. What the hell? Didn't they say the footwork booth was 100% safe? Why did the creeper explode? And what the hell's going on with those monsters? Was it that white-eyed monster? I thought we scared it off. Seeing the players in a panic, Steve shrugged innocently. This was Chairman Poe's invention. I have no idea. Steve had gotten smarter. There was no way he was going to analyze the white-eyed monster's tactics for this group. Besides, even if he did, they probably wouldn't believe him and would accuse him of fear-mongering. So, he decided to pass the blame. The players saw Steve's evasiveness but had no choice. He was right. The footwork booth was indeed Xiao Po's invention. They immediately flooded the guild channel, bombarding Xiao Po with questions. Chairman Po, what's going on? This footwork isn't working. Why did the creepers still explode? This is so creepy. It really feels like the white-eyed monster is behind this. Chairman, say something. Xiao Po had experienced the same thing as the other players. He too was full of questions. He had briefly suspected that all this was the work of the white-eyed monster, but he had no proof. And of course, he didn't want to admit that there was something wrong with his footwork booth. After thinking it over, he came up with an excuse. There's nothing wrong with my footwork booth, I've tested it many times. This wasn't caused by the white-eyed monster. You all saw him run off earlier, he wouldn't dare come back. This time, the explosions were probably caused by other monsters accidentally hitting the creepers during a fight. It was just monster infighting. Don't worry, this is an easy fix. Just dig a 3x3 hole under the footwork booth, and it'll be fine. This was just the first time we tested the footwork booth in real combat. We'll make improvements soon. Xiao Po's explanation managed to calm most of the players. It did seem plausible. Monsters fighting each other could indeed trigger creeper explosions. Although some players remained skeptical, Xiao Po had given an explanation and even provided a solution. There wasn't much more they could say. After all, joining this guild and learning the footwork technique had significantly boosted their development. With the situation smoothed over, the players began cleaning up the mess. The night passed quickly. By dawn, the plains were empty of players. Satisfied, Xu Yuan controlled his few prized minions and left the plains. Most of them, except for Little Black and the Spider, couldn't stand the sunlight. Xu Yuan had to be careful with them. After moving them to a forest on the western side, Xu Yuan finally felt at ease. For Xu Yuan, this night had been incredibly rewarding. He wasn't sure how many players he had killed, but he vaguely remembered that a couple of his monsters had leveled up to mid-tier consciousness. As soon as he opened the system, several messages popped up. Zombie 007 evolved successfully, gaining primary consciousness. Zombie 007 evolved successfully, gaining mid-tier consciousness. Little Zombie 520 evolved successfully, gaining primary consciousness. Little Zombie 520 evolved successfully, gaining mid-tier consciousness. Enderman 88 evolved successfully, gaining primary consciousness. Spider 101 evolved successfully, gaining primary consciousness. Skeleton Archer 233 evolved successfully, gaining primary consciousness. Wow, the zombie army's really pulling its weight. Xu Yuan hadn't been very optimistic about zombies. After all, compared to other monsters, zombies were just too weak. Plus, their close combat style made them easy to handle. He didn't expect the zombies to be this effective. Little zombies were strong, sure, since they were small and fast. But even the regular zombies managed to rack up so many kills. Xu Yuan had only briefly controlled the minions at the start. Once they awakened their primary consciousness, he left them on their own. He mainly focused on guiding the suicide squads and keeping an eye on the health of his top minions. Controlling so many monsters at once was exhausting. Chapter 25: Little Black and his Bomber Squad. After awakening their basic consciousness, these top candidates pretty much act on their own. Once they gain awareness, it's all up to their abilities. Looking at it this way, zombies aren't bad at all. They seem like the type that takes a while to show their full potential. Xu Yuan eyed the monsters in front of him. These creatures were entirely different now. Without his control, they still didn't wander off. After a closer look, Xu Yuan noticed their eyes seemed more focused than before. Well, excluding Xiao Bai and the spider. One had no eyes and the other had too many. Seeing the changes in these monsters, Xu Yuan felt a bit curious. How had those two zombies with intermediate consciousness turned out? Hey, 007 and 520, step forward. But even after a while, neither of the zombies moved a muscle. Xu Yuan rubbed his forehead. Are these two idiots? Just then, the system interface popped up. Creatures with awakened consciousness don't recognize their assigned numbers. The host may name them. Xu Yuan finally understood. So I need to give them names? He sighed in frustration. He hated naming things. The real problem was he'd definitely tame more monsters in the future. If he had to name each one, where would it end? Thinking this over, Xu Yuan decided to just stick with their numbers. You, from now on, you're 007. He pointed at one of the zombies. As soon as the words left his mouth, a system message appeared. Zombie 007 has been successfully named 007. Seeing it worked, Xu Yuan quickly named the rest of the monsters as well. After the naming was done, Xu Yuan waved to 007 and 520. 007, 520, step forward, come here. He was worried they might not understand step forward, so he kindly rephrased it. Upon hearing his command, 007 and 520 walked over to Xu Yuan. Xu Yuan inspected the two monsters carefully. 520 hadn't changed much, still like a little kid. But 007? This guy was surprisingly good-looking. Most zombies were missing limbs or were rotting all over, but 007's skin was well preserved. His dark skin and firm muscles made him look like the zombie version of a fit athlete. Xu Yuan vaguely remembered that he didn't look like this before. He must have been as ragged as the others. It seemed evolution had altered his appearance. Satisfied with what he saw, Xu Yuan nodded approvingly. Not bad. You'll make a fine servant. After checking out 007 and 520, Xu Yuan grew curious. I wonder how strong they are. With that thought, he began controlling some of the zombies lurking around the forest. Then, he sent them to attack 007 and 520. Xu Yuan stood back, watching their reactions. The zombies advanced toward 007 and 520. But instead of attacking right away, the pair studied their surroundings, deep in thought. At that moment, the system popped up again. 007 attempted to seize control of the attacking creatures but failed. 520 attempted to seize control of the attacking creatures but failed. Xu Yuan's eyes lit up with excitement. Wow, they're smarter than I thought. Monsters with intermediate consciousness could control other creatures that lacked awareness. When 007 and 520 saw the incoming zombies, their first instinct wasn't to fight but to try controlling them. This meant their thought processes were logical. Once they realized they couldn't wrest control, both immediately began attacking. Their moves weren't flashy, and they hadn't awakened any special abilities yet. Their attacks were just basic strikes. But their physical attributes had clearly improved. 007, being the brute force type, took out a zombie with a single blow. 520, the agile one, darted around, striking zombies while easily dodging their attacks. The regular zombies couldn't even touch 520. In just a few seconds, the four zombies under Xu Yuan's control were lying dead at their feet. Watching their performance, Xu Yuan felt a surge of pride. They'd exceeded his expectations. Sure, they hadn't developed any real abilities yet, but that was understandable. After all, they'd only just awakened intermediate consciousness. Even with that, their combat prowess was already impressive. More importantly, they had sharp, logical minds. That alone made them formidable. With this in mind, Xu Yuan called 007 and 520 back to the group and began another round of indoctrination for the monsters. Your fate is to kill players. The more you kill, the stronger you'll become. Got it? Xu Yuan's mind control was necessary because Little Black was a neutral monster. He'd only attack players if they made eye contact with him. The spider was only half neutral. It attacked players but only at night. So Xu Yuan needed to make sure they all understood their mission. Now that the monsters had awakened basic consciousness, they could understand his words. To them, Xu Yuan was their master. The master's word was law. After hearing his speech, all the monsters nodded in understanding. 007 and 520 even growled softly in response. Xu Yuan smiled with satisfaction, feeling like he was raising kids. With their newfound awareness, Xu Yuan's attitude toward the monsters had shifted. Before, he saw them as just lines of data. But now, with thoughts of their own, they were his subordinates, his comrades, his own creations. He couldn't treat them the same way he treated other ordinary monsters. After all, he'd raised them himself. Looks like I need to get them some gear. Although 007 and 520 had awakened intermediate consciousness, they were still zombies, which meant they probably feared sunlight. That would make moving around difficult. So equipping them was a must. At the very least, they needed helmets. One wrong step in the sun, and all his hard work would be for nothing. For durability and protection, diamond armor was the best choice. Naturally, 007 and 520 would get full diamond sets. As for the others, Skeleton Archer could make do with iron armor since he was a ranged fighter. Little Black and the Spider didn't need armor, they couldn't wear it anyway. But Little Black could carry blocks, so Xu Yuan thought he'd give him some TNT to lug around. Though TNT would only be good for a one-time use. Suddenly, an idea sparked in Xu Yuan's mind. Could Little Black carry a creeper? Once a creature awakened intermediate consciousness, it could control other mindless creatures. If Little Black could carry a creeper, he'd basically have a mobile bomb factory with him at all times. Excited, Xu Yuan immediately summoned a creeper and placed it in front of Little Black. "Pick it up," he ordered, pointing to the creeper. Hearing the command, Little Black stretched out his sinister black hands and grabbed the creeper. With a simple lift, the creeper was off the ground. Holy crap, it worked! Xu Yuan had only been trying it out of curiosity. After all, once monsters awaken consciousness, they abandon certain in-game restrictions. Enderman's setting was that he could carry blocks. It seemed that, after evolving, this ability had been modified. Now he could lift living creatures too. Alright then, Little Black's got himself a bomber squad. The world now has one more unfortunate creeper. With Little Black able to carry creepers, Xu Yuan's plan for him was all set. When he reached intermediate consciousness, he'd finally be able to generate his own ammo. With a plan in mind, Xu Yuan told his monsters to stay put and began heading down into the mines. Chapter 26: Triumphant Guild's Big Recruitment Drive. Of all things to end up doing after crossing into the game world and becoming Herobrine, he never thought he'd still be stuck with mining. Thankfully, the explosives ability he had made the process pretty quick. In under half an hour, he had enough for 2 full sets of diamond gear and several sets of iron armor. After crafting the equipment, he immediately had the monsters suit up. If he had more energy, he would have gone all out with full sets of enchanted netherite. But for now, this would do. Seeing 007 and 520 decked out in sparkling diamond armor made Xu Yuan a bit envious. Man, you two look like you've reached the peak of zombie fashion. Both 007 and 520 showed how happy they were to get the new gear. Turns out, they had an eye for good stuff and knew what they had. When Xu Yuan gifted them the equipment, they each reacted differently. 520 acted like an excited kid, rushing over and rubbing against him like a little cat. Meanwhile, 007 was more reserved. He was clearly pleased but had no clue how to express it, so he just kept bowing to Xu Yuan over and over. As for Little White, who only got iron armor, he stood there with a blank look, the very picture of a thankless ingrate. Bruh. But then, Little White only had basic consciousness, so it wasn't surprising he didn't react. With the gear situation handled, Xu Yuan found a spot to sit and started training his new monsters. 007, when a player builds 2 blocks high, don't get too close. Use skeleton archers or creepers to attack instead. 233, keep practicing your archery. Your strength is in ambushes. If someone gets close, back up right away. 88, whenever you see a creeper, pick it up. Drop it and strike quickly, then teleport out before it explodes. Got it. Xu Yuan coached his monsters with the patience of a parent. After all, they were the first promising recruits. They'd soon be the main source of his kill points, so he had to train them well. Although the monsters had gained awareness, they didn't understand much about players or game mechanics. For instance, players could trap monsters in boats or use their height differences to their advantage. Players had figured out these tactics over time, but the monsters were clueless about them. Xu Yuan could only teach them every anti-monster trick he knew. This way, they'd have a much better chance of survival. In the end, Xu Yuan didn't plan to keep them around forever. These monsters were meant to earn him kill points. To make the most of them, they'd need to go out into the world on their own. While he was busy instructing them, a group of players out on the plains began to make their own moves. Back at the camp, Xiaopa got to work fixing the footwork shelter issue. It turned out the fix was actually pretty simple. The only real problem with the shelter was the risk of creepers blowing it up if monsters got into fights. To solve this, all they needed was some added protection. Xiaopa dug a tunnel inside the shelter leading into the camp, with a trapdoor at the top. This way, if a creeper blew up, the players could just slip into the tunnel. Monsters couldn't use trapdoors, so it was a safe exit. For extra security, they could just block the tunnel with stone. Xiaopa's solution satisfied everyone. Now the shelter had an emergency exit, keeping the players safe. After testing out Shelter 2.0, no one had any more complaints. Night fell quickly. Led by Xiaopa, the players started another night of monster hunting. They traveled light, bringing nothing valuable, just a few stacks of stone and wood, and some stone swords for slaying monsters. After last night's chaos, the players had learned to be cautious. Yet tonight, the plains were calm. They spent hours hunting monsters, with nothing strange happening. Sure, there was the occasional creeper explosion, but it only happened once or twice. The players quickly jumped into the emergency tunnel each time. The whole night passed without a single player casualty. After a night of fighting, they finally relaxed. Guess it really was just monster infighting last time. Shelter 2.0 is pretty solid. Doesn't need any more work. Finally, we can hunt in peace. Time to grind those kills. With a peaceful night behind them, the players were in high spirits. Newcomers were eager to settle in as well. At this rate, the triumphant guild was bound to grow rapidly. After seeing the shelter running smoothly, Xiaopa wasted no time spreading the news online. Triumphant Guild is recruiting. Our perks: great location, fortified base, 5000 plus members, and a track record of defeating rare monsters. Biggest perk: we're the only guild offering a no-injury monster-killing strategy. Join us, get the strategy for free, and grow stronger with us. Camp coordinates: XXX, XXX, XXX. Xiaopa wanted to make the guild huge. After solving the shelter issue, his confidence was sky-high. Feeling unstoppable, he launched the recruitment drive. The post was pinned immediately. The promise of a no-injury monster-killing strategy was a massive draw for players. Excited players poured in, eager for a shot at easy monster kills. No-injury monster-killing guide? Free? Is this for real? Isn't this where Steve used to hunt? He's not the guild leader. My buddy's in that guild. He says Steve's the vice leader. Steve's just the vice? Xiaopa must be even stronger. Totally. I heard he invented the no-injury method, and it works on all monsters. Verified info. I'm in Triumphant. Grinding monsters here is insane. Triumphant Guild +1. Give it a bit, and we'll all be decked out in iron armor. Being in this guild is great. Only problem is, we have way too much rotten flesh and arrows lying around. Stop showing off. I'm joining. Is there a member cap? I'm heading over now. Players couldn't resist the free monster killing guide. At first, some doubted its existence, but after Triumphant Guild members confirmed it, there was no holding back. Independent players flocked to the camp, not wanting to miss out. For 2 or 3 days straight, the Triumphant Guild was overwhelmed with newcomers. Daytime was spent welcoming recruits, while nights were for serious grinding. The guild's presence kept growing, taking over more and more of the plains. The Triumphant Guild's membership hit a staggering 20,000. And that was just the accepted members, not including those who'd been turned away. Guild levels had caps. Level 1 allowed 10,000 players, Level 2 allowed 20,000. Leveling up required kill points earned by members. Whenever players killed monsters, they earned kill points. Once enough points were collected, the guild could level up. With the shelter's help, members were able to grind day and night to get to level 2. Reaching level 3, though, was still a long way off. Still, for this stage of the game, the triumphant guild was doing remarkably well. They were easily a top 5 guild. Most large guilds had come over from other games, bringing their established members. In that sense, Triumphant Guild, as a guild of solo players, had done the impossible. Seeing all he'd achieved, Xiaopa was thrilled. He no longer saw his members as people, they were tools. Alright, let's start rotating shifts. By day, head to the forest shelter to hunt. By night, hunt around the camp. Let's aim to reach level 3 as soon as possible. Xiaopa wanted the guild to grow as big as possible. As an ordinary player, he loved being surrounded by others, basking in their admiration. The higher the guild's level, the more people he could control, and the more power he'd have. Chapter 27, Time to Shine. The players might complain here and there, but even if they're worn out day after day, they aren't really opposed to anything. After all, they're now guild members, and the guild's honor is their honor. They genuinely want to see the guild grow stronger, its fame spreading far and wide, so they can boast about it too. Besides, the Triumph Guild has really benefited them. With the guild's no-damage monster farming strategy, they're ahead of the pack in their progress. While other players are struggling for food, water, and basic gear, some even avoiding going out at night, Triumph members don't need to worry. A few lucky players have nearly pieced together an iron set just from farming alone. And they're not short on supplies either. As Steve watched more players gather at the guild's base, a feeling of despair washed over him. Stop coming. Enough already. Everything was playing out according to that white-eyed monster's plan. Steve understood that the more players gathered here, the more that creature would profit. Yet, even knowing all of this, he couldn't say a word. No one would believe him. All he could do was watch, helplessly, as the base expanded and more players arrived each day. Each new face was a reminder of that monster's growing power. The situation left Steve feeling utterly powerless. He had thought about leaving countless times, but logic held him back. He might be the only one capable of slowing down the monster's rise, at least for now. Never did Steve think he'd actually be hoping for the white-eyed monster to show up again. The creature had practically vanished, and even the players were gradually forgetting about him. Only Steve knew this was merely the calm before the storm. All Steve could wish for now was for the creature to reappear soon, to put an end to this endless torment. Meanwhile, Xu Yuan had been keeping himself busy. Training his monsters took a little over a day, after which he started hunting down the woodland mansion. It took him half a day to find it, but once he secured the first kill of the monsters inside, he unlocked some powerful new skills. Deadly Axe LV1. Conjure an iron axe from thin air, delivering a lethal blow to enemies, dealing 50% max HP damage. Requires 10,000 kill points to upgrade. This skill was a gift from the Vindicators. Though not very effective against players, since Xu Yuan's explosion skills could one-shot most of them, it was a great asset against high HP bosses. For instance, it could take out 50% of a boss like the Ender Dragon's health in one hit. Plus, the skill could be upgraded to eventually deliver a 100% one-hit kill. Bad Omen LV1. Triggering this curse summons a pillager patrol, including pillagers, vindicators, ravagers, and evokers, around you. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Requires 50,000 kill points to upgrade. This skill was from a pillager kill, and it was quite handy. It allowed Xu Yuan to summon a group of hostile mobs instantly, eliminating the need to manually search for them. These mobs were significantly stronger than typical monsters, making it much easier to gather them around him. Fang Attack LV1. Summons a line of fangs within 16 blocks between you and the target, ignoring armor and dealing 20% max HP damage. Cooldown, 60 seconds. Requires 10,000 kill points to upgrade. Summon Vex. Summon 1 to 2 Vexes to aid in battle. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Requires 20,000 kill points to upgrade. These two skills came from the Evokers, both purely offensive. Summoning Vexes, especially when paired with Bad Omen, would be highly effective. With enough upgrades, Xu Yuan could eventually summon an entire army with him. After securing the first kill for nearly every major monster in the overworld, Xu Yuan had racked up an impressive range of skills, setting him up as a true demon lord in the making. In the meantime, his mob farming tower continued generating intimidation and kill points for him. Xu Yuan used the points to unlock the remaining monsters he had first kills on, then expanded his mob control range to a 75 by 75 area. With his accumulated kill points, he upgraded his teleportation and potion throwing skills as well. Teleport LV4 allows teleportation within a 94 by 94 by 94 area, carrying up to 4 items or creatures. Cooldown, 10 seconds. Requires 100,000 kill points to upgrade. Potion Throw LV4, able to throw poison, weakness, slowness, and instant damage potions. Cooldown, 5 seconds. Requires 100,000 kill points to upgrade. Xu Yuan had upgraded these two skills mainly for convenience. He'd been monitoring the players closely, noting that Triumph Guild had reached a saturation point with no new members joining for now. It was time for the harvest. Xu Yuan wasn't planning on killing the players himself, he wanted to level up his monsters instead. Apart from Little Black, who could teleport, his other seed players had to walk, which was way too slow. That's why he upgraded his teleportation skill so Little Black could take one monster while Xu Yuan handled the rest, transporting them all in one go. He also upgraded his potion throwing skill to better protect his monsters, given how hard it was to cultivate them. Xu Yuan had held back from attacking, allowing the players time to fatten up. If he were to disrupt them every other day, they'd never farm in peace, and he'd lose out in the long run. Luckily, the players were cooperative, grinding monsters day and night without rest. By now, each one of them had likely accumulated a nice stash of kill points. Watching their hard work, Xu Yuan couldn't help but smile at his seed players. "Tonight's your night to shine," he chuckled, turning to his monsters. "You scare me." After all the effort he'd poured into this grand setup, Xu Yuan had no intention of wasting it. This attack was likely his last chance to hit the players hard while they were still gathered here. So, he planned to use this opportunity to evolve as many monsters as possible to a higher consciousness level. That way, as long as these monsters survived, they would continuously feed him kill points in the future. With that in mind, Xu Yuan got to work assembling his army. He spent an hour using Bad Omen and Summon Vex 12 times each, creating 12 pillager patrols and summoning 24 Vexes. Since they were summoned, they weren't limited by his control range, meaning he could command them from any distance. He also gathered a swarm of regular monsters at a small mob tower he had built nearby. After the last skirmish where he'd rounded up monsters to stage that battle with the players, Xu Yuan realized the hassle of gathering mobs every time. So, he'd built a mini tower in the dense forest, a kind of portable monster factory designed without a kill device. This setup let him gather monsters much faster than roaming around. After 2 hours of preparation, his monster army was ready, now numbering over 5,000. This army included almost every hostile creature from the MC overworld: skeletons, zombies, creepers, witches, pillagers, and more. Xu Yuan even outfitted some of them with the iron ingots he'd mined, giving a few of them armor. Monsters 007 and 520 were fully equipped with diamond armor, each wielding a diamond axe. Xu Yuan chose axes over swords for their higher attack power. He also equipped several top-ranked monsters with iron armor, organizing them into squads under the command of his trained monsters. Tonight his monster army would march, and the players of Triumph Guild had no idea what was coming. At this moment, the monsters seemed to sense the looming battle, but none of them showed any sign of backing down. Their eyes were filled with resolve. Especially 007 and 520, Xu Yuan could even catch a glint of excitement in their eyes. Maybe that's just the nature of monsters. Chapter 28. He's back. Xu Yuan knew his monster army was outnumbered by the players of the Triumph Guild, but numbers alone wouldn't decide this battle. If it were just an ordinary horde of monsters, the guild could indeed crush them with sheer numbers. But Xu Yuan's monsters, They had Xu Yuan as their brain. There was no way they could lose this fight. Seeing his monster army taking shape, Xu Yuan's heart raced with excitement. Maybe this was how Herobrine felt when he first built his monster army? Xu Yuan couldn't help but daydream. Same. If he could one day create an undead legion like Herobrine's, this whole trip across worlds would be worth it. But he wasn't even sure if creatures like Entity 303, Null, the Demon King of Fear, or Death Knights existed here. There was no point thinking too far ahead. He could only take it one step at a time. Right now, his focus was on winning this battle decisively. Xu Yuan looked at the monsters in front of him. The monsters looked back, as if awaiting his command. Xu Yuan glanced toward the torchlit field camp in the distance. It's time. Slaughter them. Leave no one alive. Night had fallen, and the players of the Triumph Guild had settled into their nightly routine of killing monsters. The footwork stalls, improved thanks to Xiaopo's tweaks, hadn't had any incidents since. Players had completely let their guard down. Inside each stall, they chatted idly to pass the time. Hey, Li Wei, you're one of the old-timers, right? Did you ever see that white-eyed monster? Is it true he looks like Big Boss Steve? Not only did I see him, my little wolf pup actually scared him off. That monster, it's weird. It does look exactly like our vice president, but those eyes are kinda creepy. Li Wei, that's awesome. No wonder our guild has so many wolves. That monster's never coming back. Wonder when the boss will send us out to hunt it down. Bet it'd drop some awesome loot? Boss knows best. We just focus on footwork. Li Wei was soaking up the newbie's admiration, casually boasting about his accomplishments. But something outside the stall caught his attention. What's going on? Why hasn't any monster shown up? The new players with him also noticed this and shook their heads. No idea, none here either. Could it be there are just too many stalls now? Monsters can't get through? Li Wei shook his head at that. Shouldn't be. Just a few days ago, everything was fine. Li Wei was puzzled. Then he saw players in the guild chat discussing the same thing. Is there something wrong with the stalls again? No monsters showing up. Same here. Been waiting 5 minutes, nothing. Did we run out of monsters on the plains? Oh wait, probably some other issue. We'll wait for the boss to sort it out. Seeing more and more players report the same issue, Li Wei couldn't sit still. Being impatient by nature, he wanted to know what was happening. He grabbed a shovel and dug out a small hole in the stall wall, peeking outside. All around, outside the stalls, was just empty land, as if the monsters had vanished. Li Wei squinted toward the plains in the distance. And what he saw almost made him wet himself. In the distance, he saw rows upon rows of red dots, flickering and slowly closing in. They were too far to make out clearly, but he knew exactly what those red dots were. They were monster eyes, hidden in the night. The number of red dots was terrifying. Just in that one row, there were thousands. And in the middle of this monstrous horde, 2 brilliant white lights glared from the darkness. Just seeing those 2 beams of light, Li Wei felt a chill run through him. He remembered those lights vividly. A few days ago, he had locked eyes with that white glare. That deadly glow came from the white-eyed monster's eyes. He's coming back. Li Wei stumbled, falling to the ground. Seeing Li Wei's horrified expression, the new players were baffled. Li Wei didn't bother explaining. He scrambled to open the hidden hatch below the stall and dropped into the tunnel below. He sprinted toward the guild camp, shouting orders in the guild chat. All players with wolves, get your wolves and gather in the camp. Hurry up. He's back. After that last incident, when the wolf pups scared off the white-eyed monster, Li Wei was promoted to a guild officer. Xiaopo and the others had been actively catching and training wolves to counter the white-eyed monster. They even set up a dedicated werewolf squad. Li Wei was in charge of that squad. Though calling it the werewolf squad was just a fancy way to say they were a bunch of dog walkers. When players in the guild chat saw Li Wei's message, they were confused. Who's coming? Didn't Li Captain say to gather the wolf pups? Could it be that the white-eyed monster is back? He dares to come back. Doesn't he know how many wolves we have now? Perfect. Saves us the trouble of looking for him. This time, let's make sure he doesn't leave. The players knew the white-eyed monster feared wolves. With Li Wei urgently gathering the wolves, it didn't take much for them to piece it together. Although they realized the white-eyed monster was back, none of them were worried. Some were even excited. They were sure the white-eyed monster feared wolves. The guild now had over 1,000 wolves. More than enough to tear the white-eyed monster to pieces. By showing up now, the monster was practically offering himself up. Xiao Pa saw Li Wei's message and quickly had players in the watchtowers scan the area. The recent calm had made them all lax. Most watchtower players were either watching streams or browsing forums. Though there were 10 players in each watchtower, none were actually keeping watch. When they finally checked, though, the sight left them petrified. North Tower reporting. Enemies sighted in the distance, a lot of them. It was a good thing none of them had trypophobia, otherwise, they'd have had an episode. In the distance, dense clusters of red dots swarmed toward them like a cloud of locusts. The players in the North Tower hadn't even finished reporting before the players in the East, West, and South Towers sent similar reports. Same here in the East, tons of monsters. Easily over 1,000. West side too. Looks like about 1,000 here as well. South side as well. At least 1,000 or 2,000. Hearing this, Xiao Pa was stunned. What's going on? Didn't he get scared off last time? Why is he back again? Quick, get all players back to camp. Gather the werewolf squad. Xiao Pa was shaken but still capable of thinking. He pinned his hopes on the wolves. After all, it was the wolves that scared the white-eyed monster off last time. If they could pull off the same trick, they could drive off the white-eyed monster again, and the rest of the monsters would be easy to handle. Where's Steve? Get him here immediately. After giving the orders, Xiao Pa started looking for Steve. Even though he was the guild leader, Xiao Pa didn't have much in the way of command skills. During the last battle, Steve's leadership had been impressive. In times like this, Steve's guidance would definitely be more reliable than his own. The vice president was just here. Where'd he go? Maybe he's already at the command post? Chapter 29, the day has finally come. No, I didn't see him at all. Xiao Wu, where's your boss? How should I know? I wasn't with him. Just before Li Wei sent out that message in the guild channel, Steve was still at the base. A lot of players had seen him there. Then, in a flash, he was gone, as if he'd vanished into thin air. Even those closest to him, like Xiao Wu, had no clue where he'd gone. Everyone search for him. And suit up with the best gear you have. Same as before, wall repairers, archers, builders, split into groups. Get ready for battle. With Steve gone, all command had shifted to Xiao Pa. But Xiao Pa wasn't exactly a strategist, so all he could do was copy Steve's previous formations. Right now, Steve was hiding inside the trunk of a tall jungle tree just outside the base, surveying the area below. Finally, the day has come. After seeing Li Wei's message, Steve instantly knew the white-eyed monster was coming to finish them off. So he'd quietly slipped away from the base. He was nestled within one of the jungle trees he'd previously suggested Xiao Pa plant. There weren't any trees like this around the base before, but Steve had recommended they add some for variety. Xiao Pa didn't think much of it and agreed. Now, this towering tree was the perfect spot for a live broadcast. He had a clear view of everything happening at the base below. Sure, he felt bad for the players in Triumph Guild. But this was the only thing he could do now. Even if he stayed there to lead the battle, it wouldn't change anything. Better to broadcast the fight and let everyone see, firsthand, that they were no match for the white-eyed monster. Once players understood this, maybe they'd stop throwing themselves at the monster. Without clueless players to target, the monster wouldn't be able to hunt them so easily. That way, with some time to grow stronger, maybe they'd have a real shot at taking him down one day. Watching the monster horde closing in below, Steve's heart started pounding. So, this is his real strength? It had only been a few days since the last time, but the monster's power had grown astronomically. If nothing else, the sheer number of creatures he controlled told the whole story. Last time, the monster had only brought 100 or so creatures. This time, there were thousands. There were only two possibilities. Either the white-eyed monster had held back his true power last time, or his strength had grown explosively in just these few days. Steve leaned towards the first option. The monster had likely hidden his strength on purpose. Everything he'd done before had all been part of a setup for today's massacre. Seeing the swarm getting closer, Steve sent a message to Xiao Wu. Start the stream. Steve had cleverly placed Xiao Wu inside the base to stream what was happening up close. Meanwhile, Steve would broadcast the bird's-eye view of the battle. Once Xiao Wu confirmed, Steve linked his stream as a side channel and went live. The title was blunt. He's here. With Steve's well-known reputation, the stream shot straight to the top. Players seeing the title immediately thought of the white-eyed monster. They hadn't heard much about him lately, but they hadn't forgotten either. As players entered the stream and saw the feed, chills ran down their spines. Holy! All those red dots, they're all monsters? Whoa! My phobia is kicking in. Are all these creatures under that white-eyed monster's control? Wait, how did he go from controlling 100 creatures to this? So, Triumph Guild is actually fighting the white-eyed monster? Since the white-eyed monster had been chased off last time, no one had heard from him. Steve's streams of that field had stopped too. The white-eyed monster had just vanished. And after Xiao Pe and the others formed their guild, they never brought him up again. Players had almost started to forget he existed. But Steve's new stream yanked that terrifying memory right back into focus. Now, watching the monster horde closing in on the base walls, players felt the pressure even from afar. This time was different. The monsters were coming from all directions, forming a perfect encirclement. Did the white-eyed monster get smarter? A four-way ambush? I thought Triumph Guild had a no-damage farming trick, though, right? This should be fine. No-damage farming only works on regular creatures. These ones are under the monster's control. They won't just stand there and get slaughtered. Yeah, the white-eyed monster can control their movements. Last time, he had them freeze when he fought Brother Mang. Then they'll have to go after the leader. Isn't the monster afraid of wolves? Whoa! Check the side stream. Triumph Guild's gear is insane. Since the main and side streams were in the same section, some players hadn't noticed the side feed until someone pointed it out. Then they all tuned in. The side stream showed Triumph Guild's players gearing up for battle. Each one was fully equipped. Around 500 of them were in full iron armor. These were the elite of Triumph Guild. Most of the other players had at least 1 or 2 iron items. In terms of gear, Triumph Guild was already pretty impressive. Full iron armor was hard to come by this early on. Players didn't fully know how to mine yet, and mineral resources in the game were limited. So if someone had even 1 or 2 iron items, they were considered well-equipped. But here, every member of Triumph Guild had at least some iron gear, with over 500 in full sets. All thanks to their dedication and practice. Watching, players in the stream couldn't hide their envy. Whoa, they've got that much iron armor? Man, they must really know how to farm mobs safely. Looks like they're all set for a real fight. True, I did a quick count. That monster army is probably around 4,000 to 5,000. Triumph Guild's maxed out at 2,000 members, right? At least they have numbers. I'm jealous. They're gonna loot a ton from this battle, maybe even take down the monster. As the viewers chatted, the main stream's camera angle shifted. The feed showed row after row of wolves, each with a different colored collar, all sitting obediently in place. The sight had the audience in awe. Whoa! So many wolves! Looks like they're fully prepared for this. That's gotta be a few hundred wolves, right? More than that. I'm thinking over 1,000. The white-eyed monster's gonna freak when he sees this. He's in for a shock. Seeing Triumph Guild's inside view, everyone felt sure the guild had the upper hand. They had the numbers and the gear advantage. Plus, they knew the monster's weakness. He feared wolves. Triumph Guild had prepared hundreds of wolves just for this battle. If they could hold off the white-eyed monster, the rest of the horde would be easy pickings. Just the wolves alone might be enough to secure victory. Watching the scene, Steve chuckled to himself. So naive. No one knew better than Steve that these wolves would do nothing against the white-eyed monster. Everything before was an act, staged by the monster himself. Very soon, the players were in for a rude awakening. Steve let them dream for now. No need to shatter the illusion. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. Chapter 30 All or Nothing. The players were all in position, waiting for Xiao Po's orders. He glanced around, trying to think fast, then turned to the lookout tower and yelled, "What's the situation outside?" The players on lookout replied quickly. "Monsters are about 100 meters from the northern wall. Same here on the south. East side too. West is the same." Seeing the monsters gather closer and closer, everyone was starting to feel the tension. Sure, they had decent gear, and their trained wolves helped. But for most players, this was their first real fight. They'd never experienced anything like this. After listening to the scouts, Xiao Po thought for a moment. Then, he gave an order that took everyone by surprise. "Break open the walls. Release the wolves. Take down the leader first. If we eliminate the white-eyed monster, the rest of these minions will be nothing but free loot." Xiao Po firmly believed that the white-eyed monster was afraid of wolves. That was why, after he formed the guild, he encouraged everyone to breed and train wolves, to prepare for this exact fight. And now, he finally had the chance to put that plan into action. Some players had already started doubting his abilities since he'd been following Steve's previous tactics all along. Xiao Po didn't want to be underestimated, so he was ready to take a risk. The players were stunned when they heard his command. "Wait, open the gates? Are you serious? Doesn't that mean the monsters can just waltz right in? So what? We've got the wolves. That white-eyed freak won't dare come in. Our leader came up with a no-damage monster farming tactic. What's there to worry about?" Even though many players questioned Xiao Po's strategy, they had no choice but to follow his orders now. Xiao Po ignored the murmurs, shouting loudly, "Open the gates. Release the wolves." At Xiao Po's command, the players grabbed pickaxes and started tearing down the very walls they'd worked so hard to build. The sight of them doing this was bizarrely comical. Normally, when facing a siege, you'd lock down the gates tight. But here was the Triumph Guild, chipping away at their own defenses. Viewers in the live stream couldn't contain themselves. This is next-level absurdity. More like, the monsters are already in the house. My doors are open, with open arms waiting for you. Hey, who let you play music? This strategy, it's unique, to say the least. Maybe, just stop digging. Isn't he supposed to be some big shot? Didn't he invent the no-damage farming tactic? His way of thinking has to be different from ours, right? He's probably trying to take the offensive first. With all those wolves and their numbers advantage, it makes sense not to just stay huddled inside. I don't understand it, but I'm here for it. Let's just see what happens. Most viewers thought the Triumph Guild was making a huge mistake. But word was that their leader was brilliant. He'd invented a monster farming strategy that let players get loot without taking damage. Big shots always had a unique perspective, right? So, even though most viewers had doubts, they didn't criticize openly. If this plan somehow worked, they'd end up looking like fools. Steve, watching this unfold, could only laugh in disbelief. He never imagined Xiao Po would actually try something so dumb. Seems like I overestimated him. I thought he was average, but I was really giving him too much credit. This was just plain stupid. Under no circumstances would opening the walls make sense tactically. Steve sighed, finally feeling a strange sense of relief. At least it'll all be over soon. Xiao Po's plan was basically speeding up their demise. But Steve was fine with that. The sooner this ended, the faster he could complete his task. With everyone's effort, they had a big section of the 5-layered wall torn down in under 2 minutes. The moment it opened, a wave of dread washed over them. Now, the players truly understood what a monster siege was. In the distance, monsters lined up like a disciplined army, organized by type, marching steadily toward the walls. At the head was the infamous white-eyed monster. He moved with a calm, leisurely stride, like he was strolling through his own living room, not leading an attack. Despite the army at his back, He carried an air of complete indifference, as if he didn't see the players as a threat. His eyes burned with a fierce white glow, radiating an intense killing intent and pure disdain. Seeing this, a chill ran down the players' spines. That white-eyed monster, the pressure he gives off is insane. I used to think it was just a game script, but seeing him like this? That's no AI. Look at his eyes. That's not something you program. Man, he looks at us like we're nothing. Are we really sure he's afraid of wolves? Look at him. He doesn't seem afraid of anything. Until now, most players hadn't realized how terrifying the white-eyed monster actually was. Even though this was just a game, just looking at him sent a cold shiver down their backs. This creature was more than a boss or a monster. He felt like a dark overlord looking down on them. His gaze alone made them feel small and insignificant. Meanwhile, viewers in the livestream, who couldn't see the monster as clearly, could still sense his overwhelming presence and menace. Man, even through the screen, I feel the pressure. Not gonna lie, he's kinda hot. He's got that dangerous charm. I mean, I'd almost switch sides for him. Am I the only one who thinks he's different from last time? Like, way more bloodthirsty? Yeah, he's definitely more intense this time around. If just watching him on a screen was terrifying, the Triumph Guild players, standing right there, were petrified. Xiaope, standing within the walls, got a good look at the white-eyed monster and sucked in a sharp breath. He'd seen this monster before, but something was different now. The creature's aura was far more intense than before. His eyes, glowing with that deadly light, pierced through the air, his killing intent nearly visible. It was like looking into the eyes of a different beast entirely. Xiaopo's heart pounded wildly. One glance at that monster was enough to make him lose all will to fight. He had been so confident just moments ago, with the wolves, his well-equipped players. He'd thought they had a solid chance. But now, seeing this monster, he realized he'd been far too naive. We might not win this. But then he shook off his doubts. Screw it. Let's go all out. He couldn't afford to show any fear now. As guild leader, if he faltered, it was game over. Gritting his teeth, he barked orders. Wolf squad. Charge. Xiaopo's last hope lay with the wolf pack. It was their only shot.